A quiet arrival in early American history. Before tonight's story begins, if you feel like it, leave a comment and share where you're watching from tonight. What city, what country, what time it is where you are. It's always lovely to know that this small story is reaching quiet corners of the world. Now settle in. Pull the blanket a little higher. Let the shoulders drop. Let the jaw loosen. Let the eyes close, if the eyes are ready to close. The room is warm. The night is long. Nothing out there needs attention tonight. Nothing out there is calling. The only thing ahead is a slow, quiet walk through a slow, quiet piece of old history, told at the pace of a person who is getting ready to sleep. The story begins in a small American town, somewhere in New England. The year is 1890. It is a Tuesday afternoon in late spring, and the light coming through the tall elm trees along the main street is that soft gold-green light that only exists in late spring, in the slow hours between lunch and supper, in the middle of a week when nothing particular is happening. The town is quiet. The street is made of packed dirt and occasional cobblestone. The sidewalks are wooden planks, worn smooth by decades of footsteps. The buildings are mostly two-story wooden structures painted in faded whites and soft greens and pale yellows, with hand-lettered signs above each door. A hardware store, a general store, a small bakery where the smell of fresh bread drifts out through an open window, a blacksmith shop at the end of the street, where the slow, rhythmic clang of a hammer on an iron anvil floats gently through the afternoon, a white wooden church at the far end of the square, its tall steeple rising into a clear, pale blue sky. The sound of the blacksmith's hammer is the loudest sound in the town. And it is not loud. It is a steady, patient, unhurried sound. Each strike of the hammer rings out clearly in the still air, carried a little way on the breeze, and then fades into the soft hum of the afternoon. Between each strike, there is a long pause. The blacksmith is in no hurry. He has been doing this work for 30 years. His hands know exactly what to do. Besides the hammer, the other sounds of the town are the sounds of horses. Horses everywhere. Horses tied to wooden posts outside of shops, standing patiently in the shade, flicking their tails at flies. Horses pulling small carts along the main street, their hooves making a slow, clopping rhythm on the packed dirt. A single horse-drawn streetcar rolling down the middle of the street, its wheels rattling softly, pulled by a pair of patient brown mares who have made this same journey 1,000 times. The driver on the streetcar tips his hat to a woman standing on the corner. She smiles and nods in return. Neither of them says a word. The streetcar continues slowly down the street. The air smells of many things at once. The warm dust of the dirt street, the sweetness of the fresh bread from the bakery, the soft smell of horses and hay drifting out of the small stables behind the houses, the faint coal smoke from a few chimneys where women are beginning to prepare the evening supper, the wild flowers growing in the small patches of grass at the edges of the street, the distant smell of river water, because the town sits near a small river that winds through the New England hills. This is America in 1890. It is a slow country, a quiet country, a country where almost everything moves at the pace of a walking horse or a walking person. Travel from one town to the next is measured in hours. Travel from one state to the next is measured in days. Travel from one coast to the other is measured in weeks. The great cities are beginning to grow quickly. New York and Chicago and Philadelphia and Boston. But most of America still lives in small towns like this one. Towns where the pace of life is set by the sun and by the seasons. Towns where the sound of a blacksmith's hammer is still the loudest sound on a Tuesday afternoon. The country is 38 million people, living mostly on farms or in small towns. Only a quarter of Americans live in cities. Electric lights are still rare and only exist in the richest neighborhoods of the biggest cities. Telephones are rare, used mostly by businesses. Automobiles do not exist yet. Airplanes do not exist yet. Radios do not exist yet. The fastest thing most people have ever ridden on is a train, and only a small fraction of Americans have ever even taken a long train journey into this slow, quiet country. The motorcycle will eventually be born, but not yet. Not in 1890. Not for another 10 years. In 1890, the American motorcycle does not exist. Nobody in the entire country has ever ridden one. Nobody in the entire country has ever seen one. Most people have never even heard of the idea. The word motorcycle is itself still new, still unfamiliar. In the few engineering journals that mention the early European experiments, the word is usually printed in quotation marks, as if the author is not entirely sure the thing is real. A motorized bicycle, a self-propelled, two-wheeled vehicle, a machine that moves without a horse. In 1890, the closest thing to a motorcycle that most Americans know about is a bicycle, and bicycles in 1890 are everywhere. The bicycle boom has arrived in America in the late 1880s, and by 1890 it is in full bloom. Every small town has at least one bicycle shop. Every medium-sized city has dozens. The safety bicycle, with two equal-sized wheels, a chain driving the rear wheel, a leather saddle between the two wheels, has replaced the dangerous old penny farthing. And suddenly, anyone who can walk can learn to ride a bicycle in an afternoon. Young men ride bicycles. Young women ride bicycles, wearing the new split-skirt cycling outfits that are scandalizing their grandmothers. Children ride bicycles. Old men ride bicycles. Doctors ride bicycles on their house calls. Postmen ride bicycles on their routes. Newspaper boys ride bicycles delivering the morning paper. In this very town we are walking through, there is a small bicycle shop on the main street. Its name is painted in gold letters on the front window. The shop is owned by a man named Elijah Wright. He is 60 years old. He used to be a carpenter, but when the bicycle boom came to town 5 years ago, he decided to retrain himself. He learned how to repair bicycles. He learned how to sell them. Now he runs the only bicycle shop in town, and he does a steady, quiet business. On any given afternoon, there are 2 or 3 bicycles parked outside his shop, leaning against the wooden railing of his front porch. Their owners are inside, chatting with Elijah about tire pressure and chain oil and the weather. The bicycle shop smells of leather and oil and pipe tobacco, because Elijah smokes a pipe while he works. The inside of the shop is dim and cool. A single small window at the back lets in a narrow shaft of sunlight. A rack along one wall holds about 15 bicycles for sale, some new, some used. A workbench in the corner is covered with tools and spare parts. An oil lamp hangs from the ceiling, unlit in the daytime. A small cast iron stove sits in the opposite corner, Cold now in the warm spring weather, but ready for winter whenever winter comes. Elijah is at his workbench. He is patching an inner tube with a small piece of rubber and a tiny tin of rubber cement. His hands are slow and careful. He has patched thousands of inner tubes over the last 5 years. He knows exactly how to do it. He hums softly to himself while he works. An old song, a song his mother used to sing. And outside his shop, on the wooden porch, 2 young men are standing with their bicycles, talking quietly. One of them is saying something to the other about a magazine article he has been reading. A small engineering magazine that comes to the town post office once a month. The article is about a strange new invention over in Germany, something called a motorized bicycle. A bicycle with a small engine attached to it. A bicycle that moves by itself, without pedaling. The 2 young men find the idea curious. They are not sure whether to believe the article. Engineering magazines in 1890 sometimes print strange stories that turn out to be exaggerated or untrue. But the article includes a small drawing, a careful line drawing of a wooden 2-wheeled machine with a small engine mounted in the middle of the frame. The drawing looks real. The drawing looks like something that actually exists. The 2 young men pass the magazine back and forth, looking at the picture, tracing the small details with their fingers, trying to imagine what such a machine would feel like to ride. One of them says he doesn't believe it. One of them says, maybe. They keep looking at the picture. Inside the shop, Elijah Wright keeps patching his inner tube. He has overheard the conversation on the porch. He has seen the magazine. He has his own quiet thoughts about the motorized bicycle, but he keeps them to himself. He has learned over many decades that the best way to watch the world change is slowly, quietly, without making much noise about it. The afternoon continues. The blacksmith's hammer keeps ringing slowly in the distance. The horse-drawn streetcar makes its way to the end of its route and turns around and starts back the other way. The shadows of the elm trees grow longer across the main street. A soft wind moves through the leaves. This is America in 1890. This is the last long, slow decade before the motor age arrives. Far away from this small New England town, however, something is already beginning to happen. In a small workshop in the German city of Cannstatt, 5 years earlier, 2 men named Gottlieb Daimler and Wilhelm Maybach have already built the very first motorcycle in the world, a small wooden machine called the Reitwagen. On a cool November morning in 1885, Daimler's 17-year-old son, Paul, rode the Reitwagen about 6 miles down a country road in southern Germany and became the first human being in history to ride a 2-wheeled motor vehicle. The motorcycle already exists. The story is already in motion, but in America, in 1890, the idea has not yet arrived. American inventors are still a few years behind their European cousins. American workshops are still building bicycles and pumps and small steam engines, not motorcycles. American roads are still made for horses. American cities are still quiet. The gap will close quickly, though. By 1895, a small bicycle company in Hartford, Connecticut, owned by a wealthy man named Colonel Albert Pope, will begin to experiment with motorized bicycles. By 1898, a small company in Massachusetts called the Waltham Manufacturing Company will build the very first American motorcycle sold commercially, a machine called the Orient with a French engine bolted into an American frame. Only a few dozen Orients will be built. Most of them will be lost to time. But the Orient will hold a quiet place in history as the first American-branded motorcycle available to the public. And at the same time, in cities all across the United States, other small inventors will be experimenting with their own designs in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, in New York, in Wisconsin, in California. Young men with greasy hands and curious minds will be bolting small engines onto bicycle frames, running them down dirt roads, seeing what happens. Most of their experiments will fail. Most of the machines they build will never work well enough to sell, but a few of them will succeed. And out of the 1,000 small experiments of the late 1890s, 2 companies will eventually emerge that will come to define American motorcycling for more than 100 years. The first will be a small company in Springfield, Massachusetts, founded by a former bicycle racing champion named George Hendy and a brilliant Swedish engineer named Oscar Hedström. They will call their motorcycle Indian, after the name Hendy already uses for his successful bicycles. Their first Indian motorcycle will be built in 1901. The second will be a small company in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, founded by a young engineer named William Harley and 3 brothers named Arthur, Walter, and William Davidson. They will build their first motorcycle in 1903 in a small wooden shed behind the Davidson family home. They will eventually call their company Harley-Davidson. These 2 companies, Indian and Harley-Davidson, are the 2 names that tonight's story is mostly about. They are the 2 great American motorcycle companies of the 20th century. They will compete with each other for decades. They will race against each other on dirt tracks and board tracks and the banked oval speedways of the 1920s. They will supply motorcycles to the United States Army during the First World War. They will supply motorcycles to American police departments, American rural postmen, American mountain forest rangers. They will shape the very idea of what an American motorcycle is. And both of them, Indian and Harley-Davidson, will be born within 2 years of each other, in 2 small workshops, in 2 small cities by young men who have no idea, absolutely no idea at all, that what they are building will still exist 120 years later, known to millions of people, loved by generations of riders, woven permanently into the fabric of American culture. But all of that is still in the future. All of that is still to come. For now, in 1890, the motorcycle has not yet arrived in America. The 2 young men are still standing on the porch of Elijah Wright's bicycle shop, passing the engineering magazine back and forth, looking at the small drawing of the German motorized bicycle. Elijah is still patching his inner tube inside the shop, humming his old song. The blacksmith is still ringing his hammer slowly at the end of the street. The horse-drawn streetcar is still making its patient way up and down the main street. The elm trees are still rustling softly in the spring breeze. The light is still that soft gold-green light of late afternoon in New England. The quiet, ordinary day continues. The world is not ready yet, but the world is about to become ready. And over the next 50 years, through careful, patient work in small American workshops, the motorcycle will take root in American soil and grow and spread and become part of the country in ways that no one in 1890 could possibly have imagined. Let the small town settle around you. Let the slow afternoon light of 1890 become part of the soft quiet around you tonight. Let the sound of the blacksmith's hammer ringing slowly and patiently in the distance become the slow rhythm of your own breathing. Let the horse-drawn streetcar roll gently through your mind, making its quiet way up and down the main street, pulled by the two patient brown mares. Let the soft wind through the elm trees be the soft wind through your own thoughts. The story is beginning, slowly, patiently, quietly. Tomorrow in the story will come 1901, the small factory in Springfield. Oscar Hedstrom at his workbench, bolting the first Indian engine together in the cold New England winter. George Hendy watching from across the room, the first Indian motorcycle rolling out onto a Springfield street for its first test ride. But tonight, in the listening, there is no hurry. The story will get there when it gets there. The years will pass at their own pace. The motorcycles will be invented when they are invented. There's nothing to rush. For now, the small New England town is quiet. The year is still 1890. The bicycles are still leaning against the wooden porch of Elijah Wright's shop. The young men are still looking at the picture in the magazine. The afternoon is still slow and cold and soft. And the long, slow, beautiful story of the American motorcycle is just barely beginning to stir, somewhere far below the surface of the ordinary quiet day. Rest now. Just listen. Just drift. There's nothing that needs attention. The story will unfold gently, slowly, at its own pace. And the night, the long, warm night, is still very young. The story moves forward 11 years, from the slow, gold afternoon of 1890 to a cold, gray morning in 1901. The small New England town has grown a little. The elm trees are taller. The wooden sidewalks have been replaced in places by stone. A few electric street lamps now stand at the corners of the main square, though they are not yet lit in the daytime. A few bicycles still lean against the porch of Elijah Wright's shop, though Elijah himself has retired, and his son now runs the business. The blacksmith at the end of the street is the same blacksmith. He is older now. His hammer rings a little more slowly than it used to, but the sound still carries softly through the quiet morning air. And about 100 miles to the south, in the small New England city of Springfield, Massachusetts, something new is beginning. Springfield in 1901 is a working city. It is not a tourist city. It is not a wealthy city. It is a city of factories and workshops and railroad yards. The city sits on the banks of the Connecticut River, a wide, slow river that has brought commerce to this part of New England for 200 years. Brick factory buildings line the river, their tall chimneys rising into the winter sky. Freight trains run through the city day and night, carrying lumber and coal and steel and paper and cotton and 1,000 other things from the fields of New England to the markets of New York and Boston. The whistles of the freight trains echo across the city at all hours, long, low sounds that fade slowly into the distance. In the northeastern corner of the city, on a quiet street lined with old maple trees, there's a medium-sized brick factory building, 3 stories tall, narrow windows. A small wooden sign above the main entrance reads, Hendy Manufacturing Company. This is where the Indian bicycles are built. Inside the factory, on any given weekday, a About 120 workers are at their benches, assembling bicycle frames, stitching leather saddles, painting tanks and fenders, polishing brass fittings. The factory smells of machine oil and enamel paint and freshly turned wood, and faintly the cigar smoke that drifts out of the small office on the second floor, where George Hendy works at his desk. It is the 14th of January, 1901, a Monday morning. The sky over Springfield is a pale gray-white, the color of the sky on the kind of winter morning when snow is not falling, but seems like it might fall at any moment. The streets are dusted with a thin layer of old snow from earlier in the week. The air is sharp and cold. The river, a few blocks away, is partially frozen near the banks, with open black water flowing through the center. Inside the Hendy Manufacturing Company factory, a small separate workshop has been set aside on the first floor, a quiet corner of the building, partitioned off from the main bicycle assembly line by a simple wooden wall. This workshop has been built specifically for the motorcycle project. It is small, about 20 feet by 30 feet. It has its own workbench, its own tools, its own small coal stove in the corner to keep it warm. A single oil lamp hangs from the ceiling, burning softly even in the daytime, because the winter light coming through the factory windows is not quite enough to work by. Standing at the workbench in this quiet corner is a man named Oscar Hedstrom. Hedstrom is 30 years old. He was born in Sweden, in a small town north of Stockholm, and he came to America with his parents when he was a young boy. He grew up in Brooklyn. He taught himself mechanical engineering by reading books from the public library and by working in small machine shops throughout his teenage years. By the time he was in his 20s, he was known among New York bicycle racers as the man who could build the finest bicycle engines in the country. Small pacing engines meant to be attached to bicycles that would ride in front of racers to break the wind. Hedstrom's pacing bicycles were the best in the business. Every serious racing team wanted one. It was one of those pacing bicycles that George Hendy saw at Madison Square Garden in the spring of 1900. Hendy watched Hedstrom's little motorized machine run smoothly around the indoor track. Outpacing the racers, it was pacing, performing flawlessly through the entire event. After the race, Hendy walked over to Hedstrom and introduced himself. The two men talked for nearly 2 hours. By the end of the conversation, they had agreed to become partners. Now, 8 months later, Hedstrom is in his new workshop in Springfield, finishing the work on the first complete Indian motorcycle prototype. The motorcycle sits on a wooden stand in the middle of the workshop. It is small. It is quiet. It looks, at first glance, like a slightly modified Indian bicycle, which is essentially what it is. The frame is a standard Hendy manufacturing bicycle frame, painted a deep Indian red with gold pinstripes along the top tube. The wheels are standard bicycle wheels, spoked with pneumatic tires. The leather saddle is a standard Indian bicycle saddle mounted on a vertical post. The difference is in the lower part of the frame, where a normal bicycle would have an empty diamond-shaped space between the pedals and the front wheel. This machine has an engine. Hedstrom's engine, a small single-cylinder four-stroke engine cast out of iron and polished brass, about the size of a grapefruit. The engine is mounted vertically, bolted to the frame in the place where the bicycle's pedaling mechanism would normally sit. Above the engine, wrapped around the top tube of the frame, is a small cylindrical brass fuel tank that holds just over a gallon of gasoline. A thin copper fuel line runs from the tank down to the carburetor. A flat leather drive belt, about 2 inches wide, runs from a small pulley on the engine back to a larger pulley mounted on the rear wheel hub. Everything is handmade. Hedstrom has machined most of the parts himself over the last 3 months. The engine crankcase has been cast at a small foundry on the other side of Springfield. But the fine work, the pistons, the valves, the connecting rod, the carburetor, the ignition system, has all been done by Hedstrom alone on this workbench in the yellow light of this single oil lamp through the long, dark afternoons and evenings of the cold New England winter. Hedstrom is working slowly this morning. He is adjusting the carburetor. He has a small brass screwdriver in one hand and a soft cloth in the other. He is turning a tiny brass screw on the carburetor by a fraction of a turn at a time, then listening carefully, then turning it by another fraction. His face is calm. His eyes are focused. He does not rush. He does not talk to himself. He simply works. He has been doing this kind of careful, patient work for most of his life, and his body has learned to hold perfectly still when it needs to, and to breathe slowly, and to let the work unfold at whatever pace the work requires. Outside the workshop, in the main factory, the sounds of bicycle production continue. The steady hum of a small belt-driven drill pressed somewhere in the back of the building. The soft tap-tap-tap of a worker hammering a fender into shape. The creak of wooden floors as workers move between stations. The distant voice of a foreman calling out a question to someone. The faint clink of a small metal tool being set down on a workbench. These are the sounds of a working factory in 1901. They are not loud. They are not urgent. They are simply the patient, steady sounds of craftsmen making things with their hands. Outside the factory, in the cold street, a horse-drawn delivery wagon rolls slowly past. The driver is wrapped in a heavy wool coat. His breath is visible in the cold air. He is heading to the next factory on the next block. A few pedestrians are walking briskly along the sidewalk, their heads down against the wind. A streetcar rattles past in the distance, its bell ringing softly as it approaches an intersection. Above the factory, above the city, above the slow gray Connecticut River, the clouds are thick and low. The winter light is soft and diffused. The day feels like it will never get very bright. It feels like a day for staying indoors, a day for quiet work, a day for patient, careful things. Back in the small workshop, Hedstrom finishes his adjustment to the carburetor. He puts down the screwdriver. He picks up a small oil can and carefully drips a single drop of oil onto each of the engine's exposed moving parts. He watches the oil soak in. He wipes a small streak from the side of the crankcase with his cloth. He steps back from the motorcycle and looks at it. It is ready. He walks across the workshop to a small door that leads to an enclosed courtyard behind the factory. He opens the door. Cold air rushes in. He pushes the motorcycle out through the door, rolling it on its wheels, with one hand on the handlebar and the other on the saddle. The motorcycle rolls smoothly. Hedstrom guides it to the center of the courtyard and sets it on its stand. The courtyard is a small enclosed space, about 30 feet square, paved with cobblestones. It's bordered on all four sides by the walls of the factory and a small storage building. A single maple tree grows in one corner, its branches bare in the winter. The snow in the courtyard has been shoveled into small piles along the edges. The center of the courtyard is clear. Hedstrom stands beside the motorcycle. He reaches down and turns the small brass fuel valve. He listens for the soft trickle of gasoline moving through the copper fuel line into the carburetor. He waits a few seconds. He reaches into his coat pocket and takes out a small wooden match. He strikes the match against the side of the motorcycle cylinder. The match flares briefly. He holds the flame against the small hot tube ignition on top of the engine, waiting for the tube to turn red. The hot tube glows slowly, red, then bright red, then a soft orange-white. Hedstrom puts the match out. He takes hold of the leather drive belt and begins to turn the rear wheel by hand, slowly, firmly. 1 full rotation. 2, 3. The pistons begin to move inside the engine. The compression builds. The hot tube ignites the fuel mixture. The engine catches. A single pop, then a pause, then another pop, then another. The small single-cylinder engine settles into a steady, rhythmic pop, 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 about twice a second. A slow, patient heartbeat in the cold winter courtyard. The whole thing has been quiet. There's been no drama, no fanfare. Hedstrom has simply started the engine the way he has started dozens of engines before, in quiet courtyards behind quiet factories, over many careful years. But this is the first Indian motorcycle engine ever started, and it is running. A thin wisp of blue smoke rises from the exhaust and drifts up into the cold gray sky. The sound of the engine echoes softly off the brick walls of the courtyard. Hedstrom stands beside the motorcycle and listens. He tilts his head slightly. He listens for any hesitation, any misfire, any small irregularity in the rhythm. There is none. The engine is running cleanly, smoothly, patiently. After about a minute, Hedstrom reaches down and shuts the engine off. He lets the silence return. He stands for a few moments with his hands on his hips, looking at the motorcycle. Then he pushes it slowly back into the workshop. Inside the workshop, Hedstrom closes the door behind him. He takes off his cap and hangs it on a wooden peg. He walks to the workbench. He picks up a small notebook bound in black leather and opens it to a fresh page. He takes a pencil from his pocket. He writes, in his small, careful handwriting, the date and a few short sentences. January 14th, 1901. First successful test of motorcycle prototype. Engine runs smoothly. Carburetor adjusted. Ready for road. Test next week. He closes the notebook. He sets the pencil down. He sits on a tall wooden stool beside the workbench. He looks at the motorcycle on its stand. For a long moment, he simply sits and looks and breathes. The coal stove in the corner crackles softly. The oil lamp overhead swings very gently in the draft. Coming from under the courtyard door, the sounds of the main factory continue faintly on the other side of the wooden wall. Outside, through the small window of the workshop, the winter light is still pale and gray. Hedstrom does not feel a sense of triumph. He does not feel a sense of history being made. He simply feels a quiet kind of satisfaction. The kind of satisfaction that a craftsman feels when a thing he has been working on for a long time has finally, quietly begun to work the way he wanted it to work. Upstairs in his office, George Hendy is sitting at his desk, going through the morning's mail. He does not yet know that the motorcycle has been started. In a few minutes, Hedstrom will walk upstairs and tell him. Hendy will smile. He will say something brief and warm and encouraging. He will ask when the road test will be. Hedstrom will tell him next week. The two men will shake hands. Hendy will go back to his mail. Hedstrom will go back to his workshop. That is how most important things happen. Quietly, without fanfare. In a small enclosed courtyard, behind a brick factory on a cold, gray Monday morning in January, with a single man in a wool coat turning a leather drive belt by hand, and an engine catching into a steady pop, 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 and a thin wisp of blue smoke rising into a pale winter sky. The first Indian motorcycle is alive. Over the next several weeks, through the rest of the winter and into the early spring of 1901, Hedstrom will refine the motorcycle. He will take it out on the empty streets of Springfield in the early mornings, before most people are awake, and he will ride it slowly up and down the hills of the city, testing the engine under different loads. He will make small adjustments. He will replace the leather drive belt with a slightly wider one for better grip. He will adjust the carburetor several more times. He will modify the front fork. He will change the angle of the saddle. Every small change is carefully noted in the black leather notebook. In the spring of 1901, the motorcycle is ready for its first public demonstration. The demonstration takes place on a Saturday afternoon in late May. The location is a steep hill at the edge of Springfield, a hill called Cross Street Hill, which is notorious among local cyclists for being too steep to pedal up. The hill rises at an angle of about 10 degrees and runs for about a quarter mile. Most bicycles cannot climb it. Most horse-drawn carriages climb it slowly, with the horses straining against their harnesses. It is the perfect hill to test whether a new motor vehicle can actually carry a person up a real New England grade. George Hendy is the one who rides the motorcycle up the hill. This is deliberate. Hendy is a former national bicycle champion, a well-known public figure in Springfield, a tall and physically impressive man. If the townspeople see Hendy ride the motorcycle up Cross Street Hill, they will believe that the machine is powerful and reliable. Hedstrom is shyer. Hedstrom prefers to work quietly in his workshop. He lets Hendy do the public demonstrations. A small crowd is gathered at the bottom of the hill. Maybe 30 people. Some of them are friends of Hendy's from the bicycle racing world. Some of them are local businessmen. A few are reporters from the Springfield Republican newspaper, which has been writing small articles about the new Indian motorcycle for the past few weeks. They are all curious to see whether the machine will actually do what it is claimed to do. Hendy starts the engine. The familiar pop, pop, pop fills the quiet street. He swings his leg over the saddle. He rests his feet on the small foot pegs. He releases the clutch. The leather drive belt engages with the rear pulley. The motorcycle begins to move. Hendy rides slowly up Cross Street Hill. The engine works steadily, without complaint. The pop, pop, pop is slower now, deeper, as the engine labors against the grade. But the motorcycle keeps climbing, slowly, patiently, meter by meter. Hendy leans forward slightly over the handlebars. The small crowd at the bottom watches. At the top of the hill, Hendy stops the motorcycle. He turns it around. He rides back down the hill, this time faster. The pop, 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 pop becomes a soft, rhythmic hum as the engine idles on the descent. He reaches the bottom of the hill and brakes gently to a stop in front of the crowd. The crowd does not explode in cheers. This is New England in 1901. People here are not given to dramatic displays. The crowd claps politely. A few men shake Hendy's hand. One of the reporters asks a question. Hendy answers briefly. Hedstrom, who has been watching from the back of the crowd, nods quietly to himself. The demonstration has gone well. The Springfield Republican publishes a small article about the demonstration the following Monday. The article is about 4 inches long. It describes the Indian motorcycle, spelled that way without the R, as Hedstrom preferred, and reports that the machine successfully climbed Cross Street Hill with apparent ease, and that a small number of orders had already been placed with the Hendy Manufacturing Company for private purchase of the new machines. This small article in a small New England newspaper in the spring of 1901 is one of the first public announcements of what will become one of the most important motorcycle companies in American history. By the end of 1901, the Hendy Manufacturing Company has built and sold 3 Indian motorcycles. 3. The total production for the entire first year of the company. Each one handmade by Hedstrom and a small team of workers in the quiet workshop behind the main factory. By the end of 1902, they build and sell 143. By the end of 1903, they build and sell 377. By the end of 1904, they build and sell nearly 600. The growth curve of the Indian Motorcycle Company in its first years is slow, patient, steady. There are no explosions of growth. There's no overnight success. There's only the quiet, steady work of Hedstrom building better engines, Hendy selling them through his established bicycle dealer network, and a small growing community of American motorcyclists beginning to discover that the Indian motorcycle is, quietly and reliably, one of the best motor vehicles being built anywhere in the world. Through the middle of the decade, Indian expands. The original workshop becomes too small. The company takes over more and more space inside the original brick factory building, and eventually buys additional buildings on the same block. By 1906, the Indian factory complex covers most of an entire city block in Springfield. By 1908, it employs over 400 workers. By 1910, over 1,000. Hedstrom continues to design engines. He creates the first Indian twin-cylinder engine, a V-twin with the 2 cylinders mounted in a V shape in 1907. The V-twin engine becomes the defining shape of the Indian motorcycle for the next 40 years. Every Indian built after 1908 will have a V-twin at its heart. And the sound of that V-twin, a deep rhythmic rumble, stronger and rounder than the pop, pop, pop of the original single-cylinder engine, will become one of the iconic sounds of early American motorcycling. George Hendy, meanwhile, becomes one of the most respected businessmen in New England. His motorcycles win major races across the country. His factory employs thousands of workers. His name appears in the newspapers regularly. He is asked to sit on the boards of several local banks and civic organizations. He is a pillar of the Springfield community, but at heart, he is still the young bicycle racer who loved the thrill of speed, and he still takes his motorcycles out for long rides in the New England countryside on Sunday afternoons, alone, wearing a leather coat and goggles, riding for hours along the quiet country roads north of the city. The Indian Motorcycle Company, by 1910, is the largest motorcycle manufacturer in the world. Not just in America, in the world. More Indian motorcycles are built each year than any other brand on any other continent. Indian motorcycles are sold in England and France, and Germany, and Australia, and New Zealand, and Japan, and South Africa, and Argentina, and dozens of other countries. Indian becomes the first truly global American motorcycle brand. And it does so entirely on the reputation that Hedstrom and Hendy have quietly built through their patient, careful work in the factory in Springfield. But while Indian is growing into its global dominance, something else is quietly happening about 1,000 miles to the west, in the city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. In a small wooden shed behind the Davidson family home, 4 young men are building another motorcycle. That story, the story of Harley-Davidson, will come in the next part of tonight's tale. For now, let the winter factory in Springfield settle softly into the quiet place inside. Let the small workshop, with its single oil lamp and its small coal stove, become a small, warm, glowing place inside the mind. Let Oscar Hedstrom, leaning over his workbench with a brass screwdriver in his hand, be the kind of quiet companion that the mind wants to sit with at the end of a long day. The first Indian motorcycle has been built. The first engine has been started. The first hill has been climbed. The first small article has been printed in the small newspaper. The first 3 motorcycles have been sold. The slow, patient work of making something real has begun. The winter of 1901 is long. The work is slow, but the work is good. And the slow, steady pop, pop, pop of the first Indian engine, starting softly in an enclosed courtyard on a cold January morning, is one of the quiet beginnings of one of the longest stories in American mechanical history. The story continues. The story has no hurry. The story will unfold at its own pace, and the listening can drift wherever the listening wants to drift. And everything will still be here when the listening returns. The coal stove in the workshop is still warm. The oil lamp is still burning softly. The motorcycle is still on its stand. Hedstrom is still at his workbench, and the winter afternoon is slowly, slowly turning toward evening. Rest now. Just listen. Just drift. The story is here. The story is patient. The story is kind. And the long, quiet night is still very long. The story moves west, from the brick factories of Springfield to the lakeshore city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, about 1,000 miles across the American continent, past the rolling farmland of Pennsylvania and Ohio, past the flat industrial plains of Indiana, across the wide blue expanse of Lake Michigan, to a growing city on the western shore of the lake, where the air smells of beer breweries and sawmills and the fresh wind that comes off the water. Milwaukee in 1903 is a city of about 300,000 people. It is the largest city in Wisconsin. It is a German city. Mostly, more than half of the residents were either born in Germany or are the children of German immigrants. The street signs are in English. but the language spoken in the taverns and the shops and the markets is often German. The newspapers are published in both languages. The churches offer services in both. The beer is brewed in the German style by breweries with German names: Pabst, Schlitz, Miller, Blatz. And the city has become famous across America as one of the great beer-producing cities of the country. The neighborhoods of Milwaukee are quiet. Most of the houses are modest, two-story wooden structures, painted in pale colors, with small front porches and narrow side yards. The streets are lined with elm trees and maple trees and occasional chestnut trees. The sound of children playing in the alleys, the sound of horse-drawn delivery carts moving slowly along the cobblestone streets, the sound of factory whistles blowing at the end of each shift, the distant hum of the Great Lake a few blocks to the east. And in one of those neighborhoods, on the north side of the city, on a quiet residential street called 38th Street, there is a modest wooden house belonging to a family named Davidson. A two-story house with a small front porch and a narrow side yard. A normal family home. The kind of home where normal families live. Normal lives. Behind the house, at the end of the narrow side yard, there's a small wooden shed. The shed is not much. It is maybe 10 feet wide and 15 feet long. The walls are rough wooden planks, painted a faded dark green. The roof is a simple flat slope, covered with tar paper. A single small window on the side wall. A plain wooden door at the front. A thin metal chimney rising from the back corner, venting the small coal stove inside. This shed, in the summer of 1903, is where the first Harley-Davidson motorcycle is being built. It's a warm afternoon in late July. The Milwaukee sky is a clear, soft blue. A light breeze comes in off Lake Michigan, carrying with it the faint smell of fish and fresh water and the cool, damp air of the lake shore. The elm trees along 38th Street are full and green, their leaves rustling softly above the quiet street. A few children are playing a game of marbles on a flat patch of dirt near the corner. A woman is hanging wet sheets on a clothesline in a backyard a few houses down. The peaceful sounds of a Milwaukee neighborhood on a summer afternoon. Inside the small shed, 4 young men are working. The shed is cramped, with the 4 of them inside. They have to move carefully around each other. Tools hang from pegs on the walls. A workbench runs along one side. A few wooden crates stacked in the corner hold spare parts. The coal stove is not lit today. It is too warm. But the shed still smells faintly of old coal smoke, mixed with the sharper smells of machine oil and leather and pine sawdust. A single motorcycle sits on a small wooden stand in the center of the shed. It is not finished yet. It is almost finished, but not quite. A few final details remain. The paint is still drying on the fuel tank, which sits separately on the workbench. A small leather strap needs to be attached to the saddle. The drive belt needs to be tightened one more time. But the motorcycle is close. The 4 young men have been working on this machine, in this shed, in their spare time for the last 2 years. And it is almost done. Let us meet them one at a time. The first is William S. Harley. He is 23 years old. He is the primary designer of the motorcycle. He has thin, wire-rimmed glasses and careful, serious eyes in a thoughtful, quiet manner. He is the kind of young man who reads engineering textbooks in the evening and sketches mechanical drawings by lamplight. He works during the day as a draftsman for a bicycle manufacturing company in Milwaukee, and he uses the skills he has learned there to design engines and frames in his spare time. He is tall and slightly thin, with the stooped shoulders of a man who has spent too many hours leaning over a drafting table. But when he smiles, his smile is warm, and his friends know that behind the quiet, serious exterior is a man who cares deeply about the people he works with and the things he builds. The second is Arthur Davidson. He is 22. He is Harley's best friend from childhood. The two of them grew up next door to each other in this same Milwaukee neighborhood, and they have been friends since they were schoolboys. Arthur is the brightest and most sociable of the Davidson brothers. He is the one who talks easily to strangers. He is the one who remembers everyone's name and asks about their families. He has a dark mustache and warm, dark eyes and a quick, friendly laugh. He works at a pattern-making shop where he has learned how to design the wooden molds that are used to cast metal parts. This skill will be enormously important to the motorcycle project. Without someone who can design patterns for engine castings, there is no way to produce reliable engine components. Arthur is the one who knows how to do it. The third is Walter Davidson. He is Arthur's older brother, 27 years old. He is more serious than Arthur, quieter, more reserved. He works as a skilled machinist for the railroad in another Wisconsin city, and he has traveled back to Milwaukee specifically to help his brother and William Harley build the motorcycle. Walter has the deepest mechanical knowledge of any of the four young men. He can take any piece of metal and shape it into exactly what the project needs, within tolerances so small that most men of his era would not even believe they were possible. Walter is the craftsman of the group. Walter is the one whose hands build the things that William designs. The fourth is William A. Davidson, called Big Bill by the others to distinguish him from William Harley. He is 33, the oldest of the Davidson brothers. He is a big, solid man, strong from years of working as a tool maker at the railroad. He is the most experienced of the four in the realities of large-scale manufacturing. He understands how to organize a workshop. He understands how to keep track of inventory. He understands how to train workers. His experience will be crucial when the small motorcycle project eventually grows into a real factory. But for now, he helps in whatever ways he can, lending his tools and his strong hands and his patient supervisory eye. These four young men are not formal partners yet. They have no official business. They have no patents or contracts or corporate charter. They are simply four young men in a small wooden shed in Milwaukee, building a motorcycle together because they want to, because the idea has excited them, because William Harley drew a design for an engine 2 years ago, and Arthur Davidson looked at it and said, "I think we could actually build this," and they have been building it, piece by piece, in their spare time, ever since. The motorcycle they are building is a simple machine, by any standard. A single-cylinder 4-stroke engine with a displacement of about 116 cubic centimeters. The engine produces about 3 horsepower. The frame is adapted from a bicycle frame, with additional reinforcement to support the weight and vibration of the engine. The wheels are 28 inches in diameter, with pneumatic tires. a leather drive belt, carries power from the engine to the rear wheel. A small cylindrical fuel tank holds a little over a quart of gasoline. There's no clutch. There's no transmission. There's no kickstarter. There's no electrical lighting. The rider starts the motorcycle by pedaling it down the street, the way a person pedals a bicycle, until the engine catches and begins to run under its own power. It is a small, simple, humble machine. It is not revolutionary. It is not especially innovative. What will make this machine historically important is not its design. Many other American motorcycles of 1903 have similar designs. But what happens afterward? What happens when the four young men who build it go on to build more motorcycles, and more, and more, and eventually build an entire company that will outlast every single other American motorcycle brand of the early 20th century? But today, in July of 1903, the four young men in the small shed have no idea about any of that. They are simply finishing a motorcycle, their first motorcycle, the one that William designed, that Arthur cast patterns for, that Walter machined components for, that Big Bill helped supervise, the one that has taken 2 years of patient evenings and weekends to complete. William Harley is crouched beside the motorcycle. He is tightening a bolt on the rear wheel hub with a small wrench. His glasses have slid down his nose slightly. He pushes them back up with his forearm because his hands are dirty. He turns the bolt carefully, half a turn at a time, feeling the resistance. Arthur Davidson is at the workbench. He is holding the small fuel tank, examining it in the afternoon light, coming through the shed window. The paint is a deep, glossy black. A small red pinstripe runs along the top. He rotates the tank slowly, looking for any imperfections in the paint. He finds none. He sets the tank down on a folded cloth on the bench. Walter Davidson is on his knees beside the engine, adjusting a small brass fitting on the carburetor. His movements are slow and precise. His hands are steady. He has worked on dozens of machine parts during his years at the railroad, and he applies the same patient focus to this small motorcycle engine that he would apply to a locomotive component 10 times its size. Big Bill Davidson is standing by the shed door, supervising. He has been around manufacturing all his life. He has learned to let skilled workers do their work without hovering over them. He watches with approval. He does not interrupt. The afternoon light shifts slowly across the inside of the shed. A shaft of sunlight coming through the small window falls on the workbench and illuminates the black fuel tank. Dust motes drift slowly through the sunbeam. Outside, the faint sounds of the neighborhood continue. The children's marble game, the rustle of elm leaves, a dog barking somewhere a few streets over. Shuno Antar, distant whistle of a freight train moving through the Milwaukee rail yards. After about an hour, the motorcycle is finished. William stands up from the rear wheel. Walter stands up from the carburetor. Arthur brings the fuel tank over from the workbench and helps William mount it onto the top tube of the frame. They tighten the retaining straps. They run the fuel line down to the carburetor. They check every fitting one more time. The motorcycle is complete. The four young men look at it. For a long moment, no one says anything. They simply stand in the shed and look at the small black motorcycle on its wooden stand. The paint is glossy. The brass fittings are polished. The leather saddle sits ready on its vertical post. The engine is silent, waiting. Finally, Arthur Davidson speaks. He says simply, "Let's see if it runs." The four young men push the motorcycle out of the shed together. It is heavier than it looks, about 160 pounds. But with four of them pushing, it rolls easily through the narrow side yard and out onto the hard-packed dirt of 38th Street. A few of the neighborhood children stopped their marble game to watch. They have seen the four young men come and go from the shed for the last 2 years. They have heard the hammering and the filing from inside. They have wondered what the four young men were building. Now they can see. A small black bicycle with something attached to the middle of it. A strange, new kind of machine. William Harley is the one who will ride it. He swings his leg over the saddle. He puts his feet on the bicycle pedals. Arthur and Walter steady the motorcycle by holding the handlebars and the rear wheel. William starts pedaling. The motorcycle rolls forward slowly, powered by William's legs. Arthur and Walter jog alongside, still steadying it. William pedals harder. The motorcycle picks up speed. William reaches down with one hand and turns the brass fuel valve. He pulls a small lever on the handlebar that engages the ignition. The engine coughs. The engine coughs again. The engine catches. A single soft pop. Then a pause. Then another pop. Then another. The steady rhythmic heartbeat of a small single-cylinder four-stroke engine. The sound that William Harley and Arthur and Walter and Big Bill Davidson have been trying to produce for 2 years. The sound that will, in some form or another, continue to be produced by Harley-Davidson motorcycles for the next 120-plus years. William lets the pedals spin freely as the engine takes over. The motorcycle continues down 38th Street. Arthur and Walter let go of it. They stand in the middle of the street, watching. The motorcycle rolls down the block, slowly at first, then a little faster. William leans forward over the handlebars. The engine pops steadily beneath him. The motorcycle reaches the end of the block. William turns it around carefully. He rides back the other way. The pop, pop, pop is steady and even. The children by the marble game are staring open-mouthed. A woman on a porch across the street has come to the railing to watch. A man walking his dog has stopped to see what is happening. William rides past the small wooden shed. He reaches the other end of the block. He turns around again. He rides back. This time Arthur and Walter step aside as he approaches. William brakes gently. The motorcycle comes to a stop in front of the shed. William puts his feet down. He reaches forward and shuts off the fuel valve. The engine coughs twice and goes silent. The four young men look at each other. Arthur laughs. Not loudly, just a small, quiet laugh of delight. Big Bill Davidson smiles his broad, slow smile. Walter nods once, approvingly, the way Walter always nods when something he has built works the way it should. And William Harley, still sitting on the motorcycle, wipes his forehead with the back of his hand and allows himself a small, satisfied smile. The first Harley-Davidson motorcycle has been built. It is run. It works. Over the next several weeks, the four young men test the motorcycle extensively. They ride it up and down the streets of Milwaukee. They ride it on longer trips out into the Wisconsin countryside. They make small improvements as they discover small problems. They learn the motorcycle the way craftsmen learn the things they build. By using them, by paying attention, by adjusting the details until everything works smoothly together. By the end of the summer of 1903, they sell the motorcycle to a friend of theirs for the price of $200. $200 is a significant sum in 1903. It represents about 3 months' wages for a skilled worker. But $200 is also less than the motorcycle cost to build, and the four young men are not yet trying to make a profit. They are simply trying to build another one, and then another, and to gradually turn what they have been doing in their spare time into a small side business. They built 3 motorcycles in 1903. 3 total. The first one they keep briefly and then sell. The second and third they sell directly to buyers who come knocking on the door of the small shed after hearing about the first machine from friends of friends. All 3 sell for $200 each. All 3 are hand-built by the 4 young men in the evenings and on weekends. All 3 work reliably. By 1904, they have outgrown the shed. They move operations into a slightly larger building, a small wooden workshop on Chestnut Street, which, within a few years, will be renamed Juneau Avenue. The address is 38th and Juneau, the location that Harley-Davidson still occupies today, more than 120 years later, as its global headquarters. The small workshop they built on Juneau Avenue in 1906 has been replaced many times. Newer and larger buildings have been constructed on the same site over the decades. But the company has never moved. The address has never changed. Whatever the 4 young men placed on Juneau Avenue in 1906 stayed there. Some things, once they are placed in the right spot, simply stay. By 1905, Harley-Davidson is building dozens of motorcycles per year. By 1907, they are building hundreds. By 1909, they are building thousands. The company has grown from the small shed in the backyard to a real factory with dozens of employees. William Harley has become the chief engineer. Arthur Davidson has become the head of sales. Walter Davidson has become the head of production. Big Bill Davidson has become the factory manager. The 4 young men who built the first motorcycle together in a small shed have become the 4 partners of a real motorcycle company. In 1909, the same year that Indian is building thousands of V-twin motorcycles in Springfield, Harley-Davidson introduces its own first V-twin engine. The early version of the Harley V-twin has some design problems and is withdrawn from production after only a few months. But by 1911, a redesigned and improved V-twin is in production, and this engine, the 45-degree V-twin mounted in a strong single-tube frame, will become the defining shape of the Harley-Davidson motorcycle for the next century and beyond. Every Harley-Davidson motorcycle built from 1911 until today has been, with a few small exceptions, a V-twin. The sound of that V-twin, a deep, throbbing pop, 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 a slower, heavier rhythm than most other motorcycle engines, is one of the most recognizable sounds in the world. Riders in every country in the world know the Harley-Davidson sound before they know the name of the brand. It is a sound with character. It is a sound with personality. And it traces back in an unbroken line to the first single-cylinder engine that William Harley designed at his drafting table in 1901, and that Walter Davidson machined into reality in the small wooden shed behind the Davidson family home. Through the early years of the 1910s, Indian and Harley-Davidson grow in parallel. Indian is still the bigger company. Indian is still selling more motorcycles per year. Indian has more dealers, more advertising, more recent victories. But Harley-Davidson is growing faster. Harley-Davidson is catching up. The two companies become fierce competitors on the racetrack. In the 1910s, motorcycle racing is one of the most popular spectator sports in America. Thousands of people attend dirt track races on weekends. Newspapers cover the races like they cover baseball. Indian builds a legendary racing team, the Indian Wrecking Crew, that dominates American racing for most of the decade. Harley-Davidson builds its own racing team, less successful at first, but steadily improving year by year. The rivalry between the two companies is the central drama of early American motorcycling. They also compete on reliability. They compete on endurance. They compete on long-distance record attempts. In 1915, a young woman named Effie Hotchkiss rides her Indian Power Plus motorcycle from Brooklyn, New York, to San Francisco, California, the first woman to ride a motorcycle across the United States. Her mother rides in the sidecar. The trip takes them about 3 months, covering 5,000 miles of mostly unpaved roads. The trip becomes national news. Indian celebrates the achievement in their advertising for years afterward. Harley-Davidson, meanwhile, pursues its own long-distance stunts. In 1916, a young rider named Alan Bedell rides his Harley-Davidson from Los Angeles to New York in 8 days and 15 hours, breaking the previous transcontinental motorcycle record. The achievement becomes, again, national news. Harley-Davidson celebrates it in their advertising. The two companies use these long-distance demonstrations to prove that their motorcycles are reliable enough to cross a continent, a claim that was, at the time, far from obvious and far from easy to prove. But in 1917, Indian is still the largest motorcycle manufacturer in the world. Harley-Davidson is the second largest. The two American companies dominate the global motorcycle industry, and American motorcycles are exported to dozens of countries across every continent. The reputation of American motorcycle manufacturing is at its peak. Springfield, Massachusetts, and Milwaukee, Wisconsin, are the two capitals of the motorcycle world. And then, in the spring of 1917, the United States enters the First World War. The war changes everything. Both Indian and Harley-Davidson shift most of their production to military contracts. Both companies supply motorcycles to the American military and to the Allied forces of Britain and France. Indian commits almost the entirety of its production capacity to the war effort. Between 1917 and 1918, Indian produces about 50,000 motorcycles for the military, an enormous number for that era, and virtually abandons its civilian customers for the duration of the war. Harley-Davidson takes a different approach. Harley-Davidson produces about 20,000 motorcycles for the military, which is about half of its total production during those years. The other half goes to civilian customers. This difference in strategy will matter enormously in the years after the war. When the war ends in 1918 and both companies return to full civilian production, Harley-Davidson has maintained its relationships with its civilian dealers and customers. Indian has not. Indian's dealers, starved of new motorcycles for 2 years, have switched to selling Harley-Davidsons. Indians' customers, unable to buy new Indians, have bought Harleys instead. The shift is subtle, but it is real, and it marks the beginning of the long, slow decline of Indian. That story, the rise of Harley-Davidson, and the fall of Indian through the 1920s, the 1930s, and into the 1940s, is the story of the last part of tonight's tale. For now, the small wooden shed on 38th Street is quiet. The four young men have sold their first motorcycle. The Milwaukee summer of 1903 is drawing to an end. The elm trees are still green, but in another few weeks, the leaves will begin to turn. The children who watched the first ride will grow up and become adults, who ride motorcycles of their own. The neighborhood will change. The shed will eventually be torn down. The small wooden workshop on Juneau Avenue will be replaced by bigger and bigger buildings. But Harley-Davidson will remain. Harley-Davidson will outlast every other American motorcycle brand of the 20th century. Harley-Davidson will become, in time, the most famous motorcycle brand in the world. And it all starts here, in this small shed, on this warm summer afternoon in 1903, with four young men pushing a small black motorcycle out into the street and watching it come alive under its own power for the first time. The afternoon light is soft and golden now. The sun is beginning to drop toward the western horizon. The shadows of the elm trees along 38th Street are lengthening slowly. A faint breeze still blows in from Lake Michigan, carrying the smell of water and summer. The four young men are back in the shed, putting away their tools. Walter is wiping down the workbench. Arthur is sweeping the floor. Big Bill Davidson is organizing the spare parts in their wooden crates. William Harley is sitting on a small stool, making notes in a small leather notebook about everything that happened during the test ride. Small adjustments to make, small improvements to plan for the next motorcycle. The coal stove is cold. The small window shows the darkening afternoon. The shed is quiet. The first Harley-Davidson has been built and has run and has been set aside until tomorrow, when the small work of making a better one will begin. Outside the shed, in the city of Milwaukee, life is going about its ordinary summer evening. Families are sitting down to supper. Children are being called in from their games. Street lamps are beginning to be lit along the main streets. A freight train blows its whistle somewhere in the rail yards. The wind off the lake is cooling the city slowly as the sun sets. And the first Harley-Davidson, the simple black machine that four young men built together in a small wooden shed, sits silently on its stand, engine still slightly warm, the faint smell of oil and exhaust rising gently from its frame. The story is still young. The Davidsons and William Harley are still just getting started. The great era of American motorcycle manufacturing is still ahead. The great competition with Indian is still to be fought. The great wars of the 20th century and the great economic shifts are still to come. But the beginning has been made. The first motorcycle has been built. The slow, careful, patient work has begun. Let the small wooden shed in Milwaukee settle into the quiet place inside the mind. Let the soft sounds of the summer evening, the elm leaves rustling, the distant train whistle, the far murmur of the lake, become the soft sounds of the night around the listening. Let the image of the four young men finishing their patient work and putting away their tools, become a kind of quiet companionship in the slow darkness. The story continues. There's no hurry. The night is long, and Harley-Davidson has just been born, quietly, in a small Milwaukee backyard in the summer of 1903, while most of America is still thinking mostly about horses. Rest now. Just listen. Just drift. The shed is quiet. The motorcycle is still, and the long, slow story of American motorcycles is only just beginning. The story moves forward from the small wooden shed in Milwaukee in the summer of 1903 to the broad open years of the 1910s and 1920s. The decades when American motorcycling reaches its first great golden age. The decades when Indian and Harley-Davidson become household names across the country. The decades when the motorcycle changes from a curious novelty into a permanent part of American life. Let the years pass slowly. 1905, 1908, 1910, 1912. Each year a little warmer. Each year the factory is a little larger. Each year a few more motorcycles on the roads. By 1912, Springfield and Milwaukee are the two great motorcycle cities of the world. In Springfield, the Indian factory has expanded to cover most of a city block. Long brick buildings rise 3 and 4 stories into the New England sky. Smoke drifts from the tall chimneys. The sound of the factory, the steady hum of machinery, the clang of metal, the hiss of steam fills the surrounding neighborhood. Over 2,000 workers now come through the gates every morning. They build motorcycles 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. The Indian motorcycles roll out of the factory in a steady stream and travel by train to every state in the Union and to dozens of foreign countries. In Milwaukee, the Harley-Davidson factory has also grown. The small wooden workshop on Juneau Avenue has been replaced by a large brick building, 5 stories tall. A steel and concrete addition has been built next to it. Another building across the street houses the engine production line. By 1912, Harley-Davidson employs about 800 workers. By 1915, over 1,500. The factory produces thousands of motorcycles per year, and like Indian, sells them across the country and around the world. The two companies are different in character. Indian has always had a slightly more elegant, slightly more European feel. Indian advertisements emphasize the refinement of the machines, the careful engineering, the quiet reliability. Indian motorcycles are often painted in the deep red color that has become the brand's signature. The Indian script logo, painted in gold along the fuel tank, has a graceful, flowing quality. Harley-Davidson has a rougher, more practical feel. Harley-Davidson advertisements emphasize strength, durability, endurance. Harley-Davidsons are often painted in olive green or gray during these early years. The Harley-Davidson logo, painted in white or silver block letters, is square and strong and no nonsense. The two brands are not yet quite the cultural opposites they will become later in the century, but the seeds of their different personalities are already visible. Let the factories settle into the quiet place inside. Let the slow, rhythmic sound of assembly work become part of the soft rhythm of breathing. Let the steady pop, pop, pop of motorcycles being tested in small courtyards behind the factories become a kind of slow, quiet heartbeat running under the story, through the 1910s, motorcycle racing becomes one of the most popular spectator sports in America. Dirt track oval races are held on weekends in cities and towns across the country. Board track racing, where specially built wooden oval tracks, banked at steep angles, allow motorcycles to reach speeds of over 90 miles per hour, becomes a national obsession. Huge crowds pay to attend board track races in Los Angeles and Chicago, and Brooklyn and Philadelphia and Detroit. Newspapers cover the races like they cover baseball. The riders become famous. The motorcycles become famous. Indian and Harley-Davidson each field their own racing teams, and the rivalry between them becomes the central drama of early American motorcycle sport. The Indian Wrecking Crew, as the Indian racing team becomes known, dominates American racing for most of the 1910s. Riders like Jake DeRosier and Charles Spencer and Don Johns and Eddie Hasha win races all across the country on their red Indian machines. Their victories are celebrated in Indian advertisements. The slogan, "You can't wear out an Indian Scout," which refers to one of Indian's flagship models, the Scout, becomes one of the most famous advertising slogans in American motorcycle history. Harley-Davidson is slower to enter racing seriously, but by the late 1910s, the company builds its own racing team, nicknamed the Wrecking Crew as well, after the Indian team. The Harley-Davidson Wrecking Crew, with riders like Otto Walker and Ralph Hepburn and Jim Davis, begins to compete strongly with Indian. Through the 1920s, the two teams will trade victories back and forth, sometimes with Indian winning the season, sometimes with Harley-Davidson winning. The rivalry is real, but it is also friendly. The riders from the two teams often stay in the same hotels on the road, eat at the same restaurants, share mechanical advice with each other, on the condition that no engineering secrets are given away. Motorcycle racing in this era is a small community of men who love the same machines, divided only by which paint they prefer. The First World War arrives in 1917 for America, as we mentioned briefly in the last part of tonight's story. Both Indian and Harley-Davidson shift their production heavily toward military contracts. Indian commits nearly everything. Between 1917 and 1918, Indian produces approximately 50,000 motorcycles for the American military and its allies. The Indian Power Plus, the company's flagship model of the period, becomes the standard motorcycle of the United States Army. American soldiers ride Indian motorcycles in France. Indian motorcycles serve as dispatch vehicles, reconnaissance bikes, ambulance carriers with sidecar stretchers. The Indian name becomes associated, for an entire generation of young American men, with their experience of the war. Harley-Davidson produces about 20,000 motorcycles for the military during the same period. This is a smaller number, but it represents only about half of Harley-Davidson's total production. The other half continues to go to civilian customers. Harley-Davidson dealers across America continue to receive new motorcycles throughout the war. Harley-Davidson's civilian customers continue to be able to buy new machines. This strategic decision to keep civilian production alive during the war will turn out to be one of the most important business decisions in Harley-Davidson's entire history. When the war ends in November of 1918, both companies return to full civilian production. Indian expects to resume its position as the largest motorcycle manufacturer in America. And for a few years, it does. But the ground has shifted. Indian civilian dealers, starved of new motorcycles for 2 years, have had to find other ways to survive. Many of them have switched to selling Harley-Davidsons. Some have closed. Indians' customers, who could not buy new Indians during the war, have either bought Harleys or have kept riding their old machines longer than they planned. The pipeline of new Indian buyers, fed by new motorcycles being made available through a healthy dealer network, has been disrupted. Harley-Davidson, on the other hand, has emerged from the war with its dealer network intact, its civilian customer base loyal, and its reputation strengthened by the wartime experience. Harley-Davidsons were ridden by thousands of young American soldiers. Those soldiers came home. Many of them became Harley-Davidson customers. Many of them became Harley-Davidson dealers. The company has a wave of returning veterans as an entirely new market, a market that Indians partially lost by giving its production over to the military. Through the early 1920s, this difference begins to show. Indian is still the largest American motorcycle manufacturer in 1919 and 1920. But Harley-Davidson is closing the gap every year. By 1921, Harley-Davidson has nearly caught up. By 1922, the two companies are neck and neck. By 1923, Harley-Davidson has pulled slightly ahead. And from that point forward, to the rest of the 20th century, Harley-Davidson will remain the larger of the two companies. The crown has passed, slowly, quietly, almost without anyone noticing. The kind of slow historical shift that is only visible in retrospect. Let the 1920s unfold slowly, the great decade of American prosperity, the decade of jazz and short hair and bob dresses and silent movies, the decade when American motorcycles reach a kind of stylish maturity that they have not had before. In 1920, Indian introduces the Indian Scout, a mid-sized motorcycle with a V-twin engine of about 600 cubic centimeters. The Scout is light, fast, reliable, and easy to ride. It becomes enormously popular. By 1925, the Scout is one of the best-selling motorcycles in the world. In 1922, Indian introduces the Indian Chief, a larger motorcycle with a V-twin engine of about 1,000 cubic centimeters. The Chief is the big brother of the Scout, heavier, more powerful, designed for long-distance touring and for police use. The Chief will eventually become the most iconic Indian motorcycle of all time. Its deep red paint, its large front fender sweeping gracefully down almost to the ground, its warm, throbbing V-twin engine, all become permanent images in the American motorcycle imagination. The Chief will be in continuous production at Indian from 1922 until the company closes its doors in 1953, more than 30 years later. Every motorcycle historian who writes about the classic period of American motorcycling talks about the Indian Chief. Meanwhile, Harley-Davidson develops its own lineup. In 1921, Harley-Davidson introduces the JD, a powerful touring motorcycle. In 1922, the 74 cubic inch JD. In 1929, the Model D, introducing a new 45 cubic inch V-twin that will become one of the most long-lived motorcycle engines in history. The Harley-Davidson 45 cubic inch flathead engine introduced in 1929, will continue in production in various forms until 1973, a production run of 44 years. Through the 1920s, both companies also developed specialized motorcycles for police departments. American police forces, especially in the bigger cities, have begun to rely heavily on motorcycles for traffic enforcement and for chasing down faster automobile criminals. Police motorcycles become a major market. Both Indian and Harley-Davidson build special police models, slightly modified versions of their standard motorcycles, painted in white or black, with additional lights and sirens. Indian has a slight edge in the police market in the early 1920s. Harley-Davidson catches up and eventually surpasses Indian in the police market by the 1930s. The iconic image of the American highway patrol officer on a Harley-Davidson, a stereotype so familiar to Americans that it has become cultural shorthand for law enforcement itself, traces its origins to this period. By the end of the 1920s, both Indian and Harley-Davidson are stable, successful, well-established American companies. Neither one is growing as fast as it did in the previous decades because the automobile has begun to take over American transportation. The Model T Ford, introduced in 1908 and produced in enormous numbers through the 1910s and 1920s, has made cars affordable for ordinary American families. Millions of Americans who might have bought motorcycles in an earlier era have bought cars instead. The motorcycle market in America is no longer a transportation market. It is becoming a recreation market. People buy motorcycles because they love to ride them, not because they need them to get to work. But then, in 1929, the Great Depression begins. Let the decade of the 1930s arrive slowly, a cold, hard, gray decade. The American economy collapses. Unemployment reaches 25%. Banks fail by the thousands. Factories close. Families lose their homes. The prosperous 1920s end in an economic crash that will not fully lift for more than 10 years. For the American motorcycle industry, the Great Depression is devastating. Motorcycle sales are a luxury purchase. When Americans are struggling to put food on the table, they do not buy new motorcycles. Dozens of smaller American motorcycle brands closed during the Depression. The beautiful, elegant American motorcycles of companies like Cleveland, Excelsior, Henderson, Pope, Pierce, Reading Standard, Thor, and Yale disappear one by one as their parent companies go bankrupt. The motorcycle industry in America, which had hundreds of brands at its peak, collapses down to essentially two, Indian and Harley-Davidson. Only the two biggest, best established companies survive. Both Indian and Harley-Davidson barely survive. Both companies see their annual production drop from tens of thousands of motorcycles per year to just a few thousand. Both companies lay off most of their workers. Both companies cancel all new model development. Both companies have to borrow money from banks just to keep the lights on. The factories, which had been so busy in the 1920s, fall quiet. Indian, weaker of the two companies going into the Depression, is hit harder. Indian's management shuffles. The company is sold to new owners. New executives are brought in. Strategies shift. Indian's racing program, once the dominant force in American motorcycle sport, is reduced dramatically. Indian's dealer network shrinks further. The long, slow decline that began after the First World War accelerates through the Depression. Harley-Davidson survives better, but only barely. William Harley and the Davidson brothers, all of them now in their 50s and 60s, continue to lead the company through the hardest years. They make personal sacrifices. They take pay cuts. They refuse to abandon their workers. They keep the company running through small, lean years in the hope that the economy will eventually recover. In 1932, Harley-Davidson produces only about 7,000 motorcycles, a tiny fraction of what the company had produced in the 1920s. But they keep going. They do not close. They wait. The Depression begins to ease in the late 1930s. Motorcycle sales slowly recover. By 1939, both Indian and Harley-Davidson are producing more motorcycles than they had a few years before, and the industry is cautiously optimistic again. Then, in December of 1941, the United States enters the Second World War. Like the First World War, the Second World War is both a disaster and an opportunity for the two surviving American motorcycle companies. The military needs motorcycles again. Both companies shift their production heavily to military contracts. But this time, the conditions are different. The Second World War is a much bigger, much more mechanized war than the First World War was. Jeeps and trucks take over many of the roles that motorcycles played in the earlier war. Motorcycle production for the military is significant, but it is not as central to the war effort as it had been in 1917 and 1918. Both Harley-Davidson and Indian produce motorcycles for the United States Army and its allies. Harley-Davidson's wartime motorcycle, the WLA, a 45 cubic inch flathead V-twin based on the pre-war Model W, becomes the standard American military motorcycle of the war. About 90,000 WLAs are produced between 1940 and 1945. Indian produces a competing military motorcycle, the 741, also a 45 cubic inch V-twin, though Indian is awarded fewer military contracts than Harley-Davidson. About 35,000 Indian 741s are built during the war. The wartime contracts keep both companies alive through the early 1940s. When the war ends in 1945, both companies return to civilian production, and for a few years, both companies experience a post-war boom. Returning veterans want motorcycles. New young customers want motorcycles. The civilian market is stronger than it has been in almost 20 years. The late 1940s are good years for American motorcycles, but the long, slow decline of Indian continues underneath the surface. Even in the good post-war years, Harley-Davidson is outselling Indian by a wide margin. Indian's management keeps changing. Indian's quality control slips in the late 1940s. Some of Indian's new models have mechanical problems that damage the company's reputation. Indian's attempts to introduce smaller, lighter motorcycles to compete with imported European motorcycles, British Triumphs and BSAs mostly, are rushed and poorly executed. The Indian dealer network continues to shrink. The Indian racing program, once legendary, has never recovered from the Depression. In 1950, Indian is in serious financial trouble. The company is sold again. The new owners try to reorganize. They try new marketing strategies. They try new partnerships. Nothing quite works. The company continues to lose money. Indian's production numbers, which were healthy in the late 1940s, fall sharply in the early 1950s. And then, in 1953, Indian stops making motorcycles. Let the year 1953 arrive quietly. A soft autumn afternoon in Springfield, Massachusetts. The Indian factory, once a thriving industrial giant covering a full city block, is nearly silent. Most of the workers have been laid off. A few remain, handling final orders, winding down production lines, disassembling machinery. The long brick buildings stand quiet in the October light. The tall chimneys no longer smoke. The assembly lines are still. The last Indian Chief motorcycles are being built this autumn. The final run. A few hundred motorcycles assembled from the remaining parts in the warehouse. When the last Chief rolls off the line, the factory will stop. The name Indian will continue to exist, will be sold to various owners over the following decades, and several companies will try to revive the brand at different times. But the original Indian Motorcycle Company, the company that George Hendy and Oscar Hedstrom founded in 1901, will cease to produce motorcycles after 1953. 52 years. That is the length of the run. From 1901 to 1953. From the first small workshop behind the Hendy Manufacturing Company, bicycle factory, to the quiet closing of the final production line. 52 years of Indian motorcycles being built in Springfield, Massachusetts. 52 years of some of the most beautiful and best engineered motorcycles ever made in America. George Hendy does not live to see the closing. He retires from Indian in 1916 and dies in 1943 at the age of 77. Oscar Hedstrom leaves Indian even earlier in 1913 after disagreements with the company's new management, and he spends the rest of his life quietly, dying in 1960. Neither of the two men who founded the company is present for its final moments, but the motorcycles themselves survive. Tens of thousands of Indian motorcycles are still being ridden on American roads in 1953. Hundreds of thousands of Indian motorcycles built over 52 years are sitting in barns and garages and storage sheds across America. Many of them will be lovingly preserved. Many of them will be restored. Many of them will still be ridden decades later at vintage motorcycle shows and parades by people who were not yet born when the company closed its doors. The Indian name will be revived multiple times over the following 7 decades. Various companies will buy the brand and attempt to restart production. Most of these attempts will fail, but in 2011, Indian will be purchased by Polaris Industries, a major American powersports manufacturer, and under Polaris ownership, Indian will return to production in 2013 with a new lineup of modern motorcycles built with genuine respect for the original brand. Indian motorcycles are still being built today by Polaris in Iowa. Not the same company that George Hendy and Oscar Hedstrom founded, but a true continuation of the name. A company that understands what Indian meant to American motorcycling and is working patiently to earn back the love that was lost. Harley-Davidson, meanwhile, continues uninterrupted. Through the closing of Indian in 1953, Harley-Davidson becomes the only major American motorcycle manufacturer. The only one. For the next 30 years, until the rebirth of Indian in the 2000s, Harley-Davidson stands alone as the sole surviving representative of the great American motorcycle tradition. Every motorcycle rider in America who wants a truly American motorcycle, built in an American factory by American workers, has exactly one choice: Harley-Davidson. And Harley-Davidson, fully aware of its position, works hard to live up to the responsibility. The company invests in new designs. The company invests in its dealer network. The company invests in its relationship with American riders, through ups and downs. And there will be some difficult years ahead, including a near bankruptcy in the 1980s. Harley-Davidson will continue to build motorcycles in Milwaukee as it has since 1903, without ever missing a year. Today, more than 120 years after the first, Harley-Davidson was built in the small wooden shed behind the Davidson family home. Harley-Davidson is still headquartered at the same address on Juneau Avenue in Milwaukee. The original shed is gone. The early factories have been replaced many times. But the corner is the same corner. The city is the same city. The company that the four young men started in their spare time, in their small wooden shed, has become one of the most famous motorcycle brands in the world. And it still calls Milwaukee home, exactly as the four young men decided it would. That is the long, slow, patient story of American motorcycles. From the horse-drawn streets of 1890 to the quiet closing of Indian in 1953, and the continuation of Harley-Davidson into the present day. From the first small experiments of the early 1900s to the global brand recognition of the 21st century. From four young men in a small shed and two young engineers in a small workshop to billions of dollars of manufacturing, millions of riders across the world, and a permanent place in American cultural history. It is a story of patient work, a story of long hours in small workshops, a story of competition between old rivals and survival through hard years, a story of rise and fall and rise again, a story of two names, Indian and Harley-Davidson, that have echoed through the decades and that continue to echo today. Every time a V-twin engine starts up somewhere in the world, anywhere in America, anywhere that an old rider swings a leg over an old machine and feels the slow, rhythmic pop, pop, pop of an engine that is still, somehow, after all these years, very much alive. Let the story settle now. Let the Springfield factory sit quietly in the October light of 1953. Its chimneys cool, its assembly line still. Let the Milwaukee factory on the other side of the country keep its lights on, keep its engines humming, keep its patient work going. Let the slow, long history of American motorcycles become part of the slow, long quiet of the night. The story is complete. The long century of American motorcycles, from birth to this point, has been walked through slowly, patiently, at the pace of a mind getting ready to rest. From the quiet elm-lined street in New England in 1890 to the quiet brick factory in Springfield in 1953. From the first Indian engine starting in a small courtyard on a cold winter morning to the last Indian chief rolling off a quiet assembly line 52 years later. From the first Harley-Davidson being pushed out of a small shed in Milwaukee to the Milwaukee factory, still running today. The names remain. The motorcycles remain. The stories remain. And tonight, the listening has walked through all of it. Gently, slowly, without hurry, There is nothing more that needs attention. The factories are quiet now. The motorcycles are at rest in their sheds and garages and barns and museums all across the country. The streets are empty. The night has come, and the long story of American motorcycles, from its beginnings in a small wooden shed to its vast continuing present, will wait patiently until morning, and until another year, and until another generation of riders comes along to carry it forward. Rest now. Just listen. Just drift. The shed in Milwaukee is closed for the night. The factory in Springfield is closed forever, and the quiet is very deep. Sleep well. Sleep as long as the sleep wants to last. The motorcycles will all be there tomorrow, and the long, slow, beautiful story of American motorcycles, one of the gentlest stories in the history of American industry, will still be here, patient and kind, whenever the listening wants to return to it. Good night. Good night. The story is finished.